Hi, my name is Tony Sage. I'm a dev and this is Sage Dev. I am working on extending this 32-bit sprite animation. So I went back and forth with Claude a little bit and we came up with a plan. Right now, I want to extend the functionality of the animations. Let me walk you through a plan. I want to be able to add more animations that can either be the same sprite sheet or a secondary sheet. I'd like the functionality to be more dynamic. Since we set the sizes in our actual sprite configuration.swift file, I see no reason why it wouldn't be able to do the math, except that we might have, like in our sprite sheet, empty space. So these two would be frames that are empty. We wouldn't want that to be animated, obviously, but because we set the actual size, so we can set the frame size, it should be able to do the math to say this is the width of the image, this is the number of frames, or the size of the frames, and extrapolate that. I think that was a little bit lazy how it did at the initial time. So, and then the second point I made was I want to be able to add a second animation that triggers relative to the first. This would be like if I'm doing a coin block. I would want the coin block to be a separate sprite, a whole separate animation. And I would want it to trigger relative to the size of the initial animation block. So we want it to go off when it jumps and hits the block with its head, say. And we want that to have a separate sprite sheet because we don't want to muddy the original sprite sheet. And then I want to be able to trigger these other animations as part of the random actions. This is the actual sprite state. So this is saying when I am idle, then it uses those frames for the idle. And eventually it'll time out and then it'll run. And this is done at a random. So it allows it to wander so it could do any of those cases that it wants to do. And then when I hover on it, then it's surprised. Right? This is limiting when I want to add an additional action, and I don't want the additional action to be triggered. So I want to figure out how we want to work that in here. And I don't want it to actually trigger on regular intervals. I want them to have a timeout. That way, if I have, 10 different animations that I want to add, I don't want them to repeat until it's gone through at least a couple of them. And then after that, it can repeat. So the thought is that I wouldn't want to have the same Mega Man firing sequence every single time it runs. If it's truly random, that could happen, and I don't really want that to happen. So that's the ask, and it went through a little bit of back and forth. It walked me through some of its basic planning here, but we can go through the entire plan here. So the animation system is currently welded to the state machine. That's that sprite sheet.swift. That's sprite state.swift, if I can talk. And this is set to the actual sprite sheet.png that I uploaded. Frame counts can never come from the file because of how it was written. They're going to come from the actual code, and that's because in the states we have separate frames per second, we have separate notes, right? That's something that we would want the actual dynamic functionality would have to be separate from that, or it would have to rewrite all of this. So it's not going to do that. With the new animations, it is going to do that, but we're going to include a separate JSON file to control how those actions are working. Every new animation costs a sprite state case plus 4 exhaustive switch arms for every click. That is a decorative, shouldn't matter. Rows are ordinals. So inserting a state renumbers every row beneath it. there's no way to reference a second sheet in that logic, so it's going to rewrite. We want animations where frame counts derived from the artwork, secondary companion animations that fire relative to the parent animation. This would be around my jump block. This autonomous flourish sprite performs its own, rate limited so they stay a surprise. That's what I asked for. Clip lives in JSON manifest beside the PNG. So it should not affect Swift at all. Once we have this established, that JSON is what we would edit in the future. It wouldn't actually make changes to Swift. And they fire from the Wander AI. Why is it Wander? It's not AI. It's just Wander. And sprite action. So that's this. We have this Wander list. Allows wandering, right? It would say idle, run left, run right. We can add additional ones to this, and they'll work trigger on a random state. Okay. The biggest change is the sprite state animation clip becomes separate concepts. Sprite state says a small code-driven behavior machine. Those switches keep working. That's what we have here. And then animation clip is new. And data ID sheet, row, frame count, FPS loops, all of that are set into JSON. So all of the things that I have in here where I say what's the number of frames, how fast does it run, does it loop, would be in a separate JSON. And because we have string backend with raw files, it should run just fine. No fifth switch. Sprite animation structure becomes vestigial and are deleted. Catalog is a sole authority on frame count, FPS, and looping. That is saying what we currently have in that state Swift sprite state. Goodness, why do I keep saying that? Will be overridden by this new JSON change. So we're going to have animation clip.swift, where we have our actual clip IDs, action clips, and all those logic. Then we have the sprite sheet library. So instead of the single sheet, which is my sprite sheet, load however many named sheets and slice them into frames. So both files are targeted in Xcode, 16 sources individually and not folder synced. New file on the disk is not compiled. The symptom is cannot find clip ID in scope. Yeah. So we need to have them so that they live here and are easily referenced. We want the frame counts driven by the artwork. That way, if I don't like the way that it looks and I want to add another frame, like an in-between frame, think in my walking, for example, I have, let me drag it over here, in my running right now I have 3 frames, right? I have a, whoa, what happened? Oh, I clicked the top one. That's why. Okay, so I have the state where I'm standing still facing, which is this state. Then I have the actual foot running state. Then I have this intermediary state. Say when I'm doing this additional sprites and I feel like it jumps a little bit too much, I want to add an additional frame. That should be done really simply. I could just add it in the entire output and it would add that. So that's what I'm trying to build in automatically. Where's the, here we go. For each row, walk column backwards, drop fully transparent tiles until any non-zero alpha. So this is saying we are now taking into account if it's empty. If it doesn't see anything but transparency, those transparent frames are removed. It's going to build all of them split and then drop any of the ones that are empty. So an interior frame for a blink or flicker is intentional. And that's obvious. If for some reason I wanted to give it so that when it's doing its run animation, for example, oops, I'm locked, sorry. That would be easier to demo if I wasn't locked. Say I wanted to delete one frame so it went from standing still to run, and then I wanted a flicker effect where it blinked at me, that would be an empty frame. And that's how it's going to be built to handle it. And then guarantee more than one frame. If it's a blank row, more or equal. I don't like how it kind of doesn't set the greater than equal with the equal as a straight line. It's kind of angled. That's weird. Anyway, wholly blank row means not authored yet. That clip is unavailable and false. I won't ever add an empty one, but I suppose it's nice to have it. Manifest frames override the derived count. So if I have them in this new JSON manifest, then that would be the source of truth, not the math that's trying to do it for me. So here we have all these are coming from sprite sheet. Now they're going to be set in a JSON file so that I can say, okay, my sprite sheet is 3232, my effects are 3232, I have all of them are coming from the sprite sheet, these are the number of rows in that sheet, and then I can add additional. So if I have a different sheet, like effects, charge shot would be my effect, so it would be an ancillary animation, and it would set an FPS, and it sets to loop, and I can do things like in my actual sprite sheet, I can add additional row. This would be row 5. So right now I have 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be row 5 of my existing sprite sheet. I can set the frames per second to something different if I wanted to. Not going to loop, and when it runs, it'll trigger an effect that'll come to this different clip. So that's pretty nice. And clips, active effect, clip elapsed, anchor offset, facing at spawn. Z are just additional bits that it's adding to these. And source pixels of the parent frame scale to point mirrored on X when facing equals dot left. Yeah, I don't really care. I'm not going to animate something where I suppose that would be good if I wanted to have him fire, say, a Mega Man charged blast to the left or right. If I wanted him to be able to jump to the left or right to collect a coin. So that's fine. Published, writes only on change, window clearance effect. So if I wanted the separate animation to have a limit in its effect size, then I could set that separately. Update wander gains a third branch besides the idle run roll flourish. And it's setting a new time interval so that on each tick it builds up an interval. And when somebody is animating, I guess I could run my sprite. That might be good. So when I'm running the sprite, if I interrupt it for some reason, so I hover over it or something, it's going to cancel out my current build, or my current step. So if it starts doing a Mega Man charge shot, or like it's right now it's jumping and it's surprised, right? If it is doing something else and I hover over it, it'll just bail and it'll go back to its regular state. So that is fine. Dormancy, would throttle back to 12 hertz. All right. Yeah, so it's going to go through and modify all these files. It's going to create some additional changes through my tick loop so that it can do some additional physics changes and things depending on how I do it. And once it's all set up, add animations clip.swift and sprite sheet library.swift to desktop sprite target. And yeah, that's fine. And it's going to update all my docs. So that's a lot of doc. That's a thorough plan. Let's go ahead and accept it. I'm working in Opus 5 today, which is fine. I'm going to bypass permissions because I don't have this in prod. And we're going to let it spin, and then we'll review what it comes back with. Okay, it's been running a bit. Let's see what it came up with. So the first thing it wrote was this animation clip.swift. There's a lot of inline comments here. AI does love its inline comments. This is going to take and break up our clips. So it's getting them from strings, decoded from bare JSON string idle. Okay, so it's taking the clip ID and setting it into a variable. Then it has my on frame so that we have a trigger saying on frame this, then we execute that. So on frame 4 maybe of the Mega Man, then we trigger the effect to start the Mega Man charged bullet animation per se. Then we spawn a second sprite that appears at a point relative to the character and plays out its own clip. And that's going to be like our block. What is the anchor point inside of that first 32 by 32 grid? Does it follow the character? I might need to tweak this a little bit so that I can make it so when it fires, say it fires all the way to the right. Ooh. Then single animation where its frames are, how fast they play, that's for the second. This is my JSON parsing. We have the clip ID, and then which sheet is it holding that animation, row within the sheet from the top, and then how many frames. That could come from the actual art, but we could set it here, frames per second. So if I wanted it to go faster, I could go faster. Does it loop? Present if the sprite may perform this clip spontaneously. That would make it a flourish. And then companion animation spawn would be the effects, like my coin block. Then it has all my FPS, logic. There's the JSON ID, sheet, row, frame count, or flourish. This is probably setting it into a variable. Yeah. Then we have frame counts if it's dynamic. We have our catalog of animation with the clips. So this is removing any empty lines. which is fine. Catalog. So everything that was done exactly as before, but now it's adding those additional. So this is taking what was already in there and building it into a JSON. Idle, run left, right, surprise, jump. Then we have where it decodes it and logging, sheet descriptors, okay. Nil count means the row is off the end of the sheet, so it's going to skip those. So there's some decent logic in here. And then effect render. Okay. There's my sprite sheet library. This is where it's pulling from that sprite art. From the loaded sheet. Drawn frame counts. Why only trailing flame? Ooh. Weird. Looks like it rebuilt itself. Or tried. Interesting. Anyway. Then we have slicing frames. Cuts the frames for every clip in the catalog and caches them. Not a crop. So instead of actively cutting them out of the image every time, it's going to cache them as individual frames, and that way we have nice functionality and it's cached. Okay. It is removing an unnecessary empty check, and it is adding that additional all clips variable. Then we have which animation is playing, which is better language. This mostly looks like comments, but that is fine. Has artwork. So it's stripped our initial. Whoa, what was that? Did it add some new flourishes for us? We'll see. I'm going to have to rebuild it because I've got one guy standing over here doing nothing. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I'll let him walk into frame. So right now he still has the functionality we had. But if he does his special actions, it looks like there's one now where he turns into colored blocks and does a weird thing. Let's see if he does one. He may not. It might have to time out. There we go. See how he did that kind of flashy business? That's probably a default for testing. Okay, placeholder sprite covers the 5 behavior clips and nothing else. This is our, again, right, left, surprise, jumps. It's giving it an additional clearance for the effect, and it's giving us our probability of getting us a flourish. Animations come from animation manifest.json. Begin flourish. Okay. Performing flourish. Logs. Okay. I think that's fine. New app delegate. Created animations.json that I have to load. And it must have added this, which is why it probably disappeared. So now update Flourish. Retires a finished clip and discards anything still pending so that its last frame would be dropped to a tick. So if it starts animating and then I hover over it, then it will immediately bail. Rebuilt my Xcode that's doing its own testing. So it's checking to see that my effects actually appear where it says they're going to appear. And it's going to keep working. I mean, overall, it is doing a fair amount of refactor here. And sets variables to use functionality, and then updated my configurations. So I have a new effect clearance, and I have my probability of a flourish. Okay. And we're waiting for it to run, so let's give it another minute. So there was a little gap in its logic. It walked me through. Basically, it's just the same as the plan. There's nothing new here to see. But one thing that it didn't do was allow the effect to move. And I said, yeah, make the effect move. And then it noticed that if it was set to loop, it was going to loop indefinitely. There's no timeout. So it's going to add that too. And it'll probably run a test for me again. Part of the nice thing about having this plan worked out in advance is it can go in and run it on Xcode, and hopefully it'll render another one. It's going to allow acceleration and velocity and a timeout, so that when I say it finishes at such and such time, it finishes. So let's see what he does. He's bopping and grooving. There we go. So you see that shot off to the right? That's an effect that we want to eventually, we'll animate it better. But that's something that we would like, and it's doing a visual verification based on that. So this is the logic of the JSON, and I can show you where that JSON is. Yeah, it said it's happy with that, and so am I. In Xcode, we have this new animations. So when we're animating clips, we can say, okay, I have a new one that's Mario block. Mario block is an effect that'll appear and start rolling when it reaches a certain point, and it appears at a certain spot. And then after a certain period of time, it will go away. If it's an effect like the Mega Man bullet, like it kind of tried to do there, then it will eventually time out and go away. We can also say how fast, or if we want it to accelerate, all of that would be built in too, which it gave a little example of what that would look like for that effect. It says it triggers on this frame of the charge action, and then it would have a velocity of 20, negative 90, acceleration 0 to 20, so it'll speed up as it goes. And it had also a coin, which all it did was add a little blue thing to say this is when you hit something, I guess. And then it tested against it. Okay. 60-second run with a straight shot, an arcing coin, attached glow. Okay. So let's give it one more run. So nothing's added yet. The next step is for me to do some more animation and do some look and feel. So that is probably it for today. Thank you for being here. I know sometimes the review of this AI stuff feels tedious, but if you give it proper direction, you also need to give it proper oversight. And when we get through some animations, I'll come back and show you some of that cool look and feel that I'm adding. I'll probably do 2 or 3 and show you how I authored it into this space. Again, if you like this stuff, if you have any suggestions, you could drop it in the YouTube comments. If you have desire to see more, you can go to my portfolio. It's sagedev.com, sage-dev.com, or you can always subscribe. Thank you very much. Have a good night.